that is, well, it's both compelling and pretty alarming.
It really is.
We're in Guyana, and we're analyzing these raw, high-stakes public statements. Grievances voiced during sustained protests right outside the Parliament building.
That's right. And this isn't an analysis of, policy documents. It's more like an X-ray of an institutional breakdown, but viewed entirely through the eyes of the people protesting it.
So our mission today is to distill those core demands, understand the rhetoric being used, and it escalates fast.
It does. It goes from frustration to accusations of, dictatorship. And then we need to analyze the systemic impact of this political vacuum.
Okay, let's unpack this. The central issue, it seems to me, is an immediate blockage of democratic function. Everything hinges on one specific position.
The leader of the opposition, the LOO.
Right. The protesters are demanding the immediate election and swearing in of Azruddin Mohamed into that role.
It sounds procedural, I know, but the crisis is rooted right there in that absence. The protests are explicitly and, aggressively targeting the Speaker of the National Assembly, Manzoor Nadir.
And the opposition believes he's doing what exactly?
They believe he is deliberately delaying the process, holding it up. And in doing so, he's effectively preventing the entire machinery of checks and balances from even starting.
Let's look at the timeline, because this is where you can really feel the frustration boiling over in the sources.
Yeah.
Members of Parliament were sworn in on November 3rd, but these protest statements, they were being made weeks later. One person noted they were, and I'm quoting, going on to a whole month now without an opposition leader.
And that delay, according to MP Don Hastings-Williams, means Parliament is basically paralyzed. He stressed that without the LOO, Parliament can't fulfill its constitutional purpose.
Which is to look after the people's business.
Fundamentally, yeah. And you hear that same demand repeated over and over in every statement. The Speaker must call the meeting immediately now. The clock is critical here because every single day that office is vacant, specific constitutional duties they go unfulfilled.
That constitutional vacuum is absolutely key. The criticism leveled at the Speaker is incredibly sharp. It goes right to the core of institutional trust.
It really does.
Jonathan Bryan from the political party ANOG, he stated that the word honorable is being trampled upon because the Speaker is seen as a partisan actor.
Not the neutral, disinterested party he's supposed to be. That's a huge accusation. It's an accusation of bad faith.
And he went on to argue that the Speaker, who is funded by taxpayers, is deliberately engaging in a tactic, a delay tactic.
Right, and the protest statements openly speculate on why. Is this all just, smokes and mirrors, or is the government strategically waiting for the outcome of various legal processes?
And this is where we need to bring in some of that legal context, because the delay is tied directly to ongoing court battles. The sources mention a case with the magistrate Judy Latchman and appeals that could go all the way up.
All the way to the CCJ, the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Precisely. The underlying issue is that the composition of the opposition seats itself is under legal challenge.
So the Speaker might be saying he can't proceed until the courts decide who rightfully holds those seats.
Exactly. But the protesters view that as an indefinite suspension of democracy. They argue the Speaker has the power to proceed immediately, regardless of those challenges, just to ensure the government can function. Their point is, stop waiting for court rulings to decide internal parliamentary leadership.
So the protest shifts from demanding a procedure to questioning political motive.
It does. And what's fascinating here is how quickly that frustration, the frustration with a procedural delay, just escalates into the language of outright democratic collapse.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The sources are not subtle.
Not at all. MP Janelle Swatnam stated, "It's clear that we're living in a dictatorship. We are not a democratic country." And then Yvette Archer, a candidate from the opposition coalition, she believes Guyana isn't just approaching dictatorship,
but is experiencing it presently. That is incredibly inflammatory language to use.
It is. So we have to ask, what evidence did the sources provide to justify that massive rhetorical leap? From political gridlock to dictatorship.
Well, the evidence, as they see it, lies in the functional collapse of the institutions, the ones designed to provide checks and balances. The LOO is required to nominate, or at the very least be consulted on, appointments to extremely powerful constitutional commissions.
Like which ones?
Oh, the list is extensive, but it includes critical bodies like the Public Procurement Commission, the Judicial Service Commission, the Police Service Commission, the Teaching Service Commission. These are pillars of the state.
So without the LO, those appointments either can't happen or
they proceed unilaterally. It allows the ruling party, the PPP, to essentially govern without any constitutional oversight in these key areas. And that systemic blockage is why the protesters use a phrase like collapse of government.
So it's not just that the opposition can't debate in Parliament, it's that the very commissions designed to keep government honest can't be properly staffed.
Exactly. The opposition becomes functionally irrelevant to the highest levels of national governance. And this leads directly to the feeling that, fundamental democratic rights are eroding.
Yeah.
Citizens feel they are no longer free to speak and to align themselves with a movement of their choice because they fear victimization if they participate.
Yvette Archer's response to that fear was really striking. She didn't just appeal to political bodies. She called on CARICOM neighbors, religious organizations, to intervene.
Yes, to address a moral failure. She explicitly asked for attention to issues of justice, equity, fairness, righteousness. And she stressed that righteousness isn't just, a religious concept. It's a necessary standard for integrity and governance.
She's connecting a political tactic, the delay directly to a moral crisis.
Absolutely. If the system is being deliberately choked to prevent oversight, then the moral commitment to the citizens is failing.
So what does this all mean for the average Guyanese person? Outside of all the constitutional law talk, how does this gridlock actually impact daily life?
The protesters draw a very, very clear line from this vacuum to economic pain. One person, Brian Max, he argued that because the two sides, the government and the stalled opposition, can't work together to set budgets and pass laws, the country is, in his words, stagnated right now.
Stagnation plus economic uncertainty. Max also claimed prices are skyrocketing to the shocks, and he attributes this inflation directly to the political uncertainty.
It's a compelling claim, especially when you consider the government's narrative about the oil boom. The protesters are basically saying, look, we don't care how much money the government says it has. The economy on the ground feels unstable. They say it's at an all-time low because of political risk.
And this dysfunction halts other processes too, right? Beyond just national budgeting.
Oh, yes. The LOO position, it has budgeted resources, significant responsibilities, especially for upcoming local government elections.
I see. So without the LOO and their staff in place,
the opposition can't adequately prepare. They can't mobilize for these elections, which are essential for grassroots representation. The protesters accuse the government of playing house with people's lives and livelihood by stalling this, knowing it cripples the opposition's electoral prep.
the structural analysis is important, but the sources become truly powerful when they introduce the human element, the face of the grievance.
Yes.
We have this specific, frankly, harrowing testimony about alleged political victimization.
The testimony from a woman named Artie, it just stands out. She described herself as a lifelong supporter of the ruling PPP, born into the movement, she said, but she quit.
Because of what? What was her specific claim?
She claims a PPP representative and the agriculture minister conspired to get her husband fired from his job at the NDIA, that's the National Drainage and Irrigation Authority.
Fired for political reasons.
That's her claim. And she made this very severe accusation that it was done because of a specific individual who she called a murderer, which just shows you the extremely toxic political environment she's describing.
Wow. And the consequence of that job loss.
She said her family starved for 3 months. She had to sell her personal jewelry, her chain, just to support her son, who was at the University of Guyana. I mean, this isn't high-level constitutional debate anymore. This is poverty. This is survival allegedly caused by political targeting.
And she's speaking out now.
She is. She said she now stands for democracy and supports Azruddin Mohamed, saying she doesn't care if she's victimized again. Her husband did eventually find other work at the sugar corporation, but she stressed he is going through hell no, hell no.
The personal risk people are taking just by speaking out is, according to this, immense.
It illustrates that deep fear that underpins the whole movement, that your economic survival is tied directly to your political loyalty. And this is reinforced by the second major grievance in the Sozas, the Stawbrick market conflict.
Right, this involves Minister Priya Manikan and the so-called beautification project.
It perfectly contrasts the government's perceived priorities with the opposition's vision. The minister reportedly met with market vendors. She cooked nice cook-up, laughed with them.
Giving the illusion of consultation.
Exactly. But she was swiftly characterized as an illusionist because what happened right after that meeting?
What happened?
The ministry installed flyboards and barriers. These structures physically prevented vendors, many of them single parents who rely on that daily cash flow, from getting to their customers, from conducting business. They were literally barricaded out of their livelihoods.
So the government implemented physical infrastructure that actively destroyed the human infrastructure.
That is the exact conclusion drawn by the Win movement protesters. They argue their focus is on restoring dignity, respect, and the economic development of the people on human infrastructure. But the government's action was seen as heavy-handed and destructive, despite the, veneer of aesthetic improvement.
And yet, despite all this conflict, these very acute personal grievances, the protesters keep coming back to a call for national unity.
They do. They recognize the danger of framing this purely as a partisan fight or, critically, as a racial conflict. The fundamental goal of the Win movement, they say, is peace, rising up and ensuring that every single Guyanese citizen feels they belong.
They explicitly try to elevate the discussion. As one protester put it, this problem is too big for identity politics. This is not an Indian man problem, a black man problem, an Amerindian man problem.
It's a Guyana problem.
That quote says it all. The installation of the LOO, therefore, is framed as far more than just a political win for the opposition.
It's presented as a win for Guyana.
A necessary mechanism to restore the country's faith in its own governing structure and just allow the nation to move forward together.
So if we just summarize the stakes here, as presented in these sources, we see a crucial democratic step electing the LOO is stalled. This stalling is then directly blamed for systemic stagnation, immediate economic hardship, and active political victimization. It is a powerful indictment, and it brings us back to that question of external support. The protesters, as we noted, made urgent pleas for international and regional intervention. They called on CARICOM, on diplomatic observers.
The sources mentioned the thunderous and deafening silence from specific figures and entities, the Miam, the Andrew, the Gonzales, and CARICOM itself. And just for clarity, these are likely references to key regional players, people like Miata French, or former leaders like Andrew Holness or Felipe Gonzalez.
People who have previously involved themselves in regional stability. And that silence, the lack of response to these televised pleas from citizens who believe their democracy is collapsing, that is perhaps the most corrosive element of this whole situation.
Because it signals that they're on their own.
It signals that their domestic political struggle is being largely ignored by the very regional bodies that are mandated to uphold democratic norms.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought for you to explore. If the citizens on the ground are risking their livelihoods, if they're using the language of dictatorship to demand intervention, what does that documented international silence signal about the perceived severity of this crisis versus the political appetite for intervention by Guyana's neighbors? A question for you to mull over as you continue learning about this critical situation.
Thank you for sharing these powerful sources and allowing us to take this deep dive.
Until next time.